So I am delighted again to greet you and to introduce our keynote speaker today, Dr. Sara Zeff Geber, whose pronouns are she, her, is the recipient in 2018 of the Influencers in Aging designation by PBS's Next Avenue. She's an author and professional speaker on retirement and aging. Sara has developed a niche specialty working with solo agers, people who have no children or who are aging alone. With her speaking and writing, Sara has been raising awareness of solo agers for the past 10 years. She believes solo agers have unique needs in later life that warrant greater foresight and a more robust approach to planning. Dr. Geber is the author of Essential Retirement, Planning for Solo Agers, a retirement and aging roadmap for single and childless adults, which was selected in 2018, the year that it was published, as a best book on aging well by the Wall Street Journal. In 2023, Sara was the guest editor of the summer issue of the American Society on Aging's Generations Journal, one of the most popular issues ever released, containing 16 articles on a wide variety of topics important to solo agers. Sara has been a regular contributor to Forbes.com on the topics of aging and retirement, and is a fellow at Nexus Insights, a think tank and incubator for revolutionary concepts in senior living and aging. A sought-after speaker at conferences on retirement and aging, Sara is active in the Retirement Coaches Association, the American Society on Aging, the Life Planning Network, the Transition Network, and the Sonoma County section on aging. Though married, Sara considers herself a solo ager since she has no children. She lives with her husband and Pooch, I would call that a child, in Sonoma County, California. And we are honored, so honored, to welcome you, Sara, this morning as our keynote.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Nadia. I'm happy to be here. I want to talk about solo aging in the context that I generally talk about it. So you may get a sort of a different perspective than you have before, or different ideas about what solo aging is to me and why I think it's important. And I want to show my screen because I want to do this through a series of slides. So you're going to see a little bit of how the sausage is made this morning, because we didn't really have a chance to get my presenter view up here, but we're gonna go through it and hope that we get it up the way I want it and the way you want it. So I'm going to share my screen, and I think I'll do basic first. Okay, is everybody seeing my screen?
Yes, we are.
Yes, okay. So now I'm going to do a new share. All right, stop share. No, that's not working. Share. Advanced portion of screen. For some reason or other, my presenter view is not working properly. View. Nope. You know what?
One thought, do you have it, have you clicked it on slideshow, or is it on a different kind of, there you go.
Well, I have
Go
my,
back to the previous view and we'll just follow through and you could click through on the right and the left. So
well,
go back to the previous view, the share screen.
yeah, I'm
And
gonna stop the share. Okay. Oops.
and we can see really well with that last view you had before.
Yeah, except I can't see my notes, but that won't be too terrible of a handicap. Okay, we'll just go back to the basic share screen. So you're seeing my whole screen now, right?
Yes.
Yes, we are.
Okay, so I'm not going to worry about presenter view because most of it is pretty darn familiar to me at this point. So as Rabbi Nadia told you a little bit about me, today I'm probably the person that most people call when they want to know about solo aging, because I started looking at solo aging about 10 years ago, 10, 12, something like that. I had decided after a lifetime in organizational consulting that I really wanted to start focusing on the retirement transition, because so many of my older clients were starting to talk about retirement, and it just seemed like a human transition was taking place in front of my eyes, especially for the older baby boomers. So I made a shift and I started doing some retirement coaching, learning a lot more about that. And along the way, I had a chance to take some gerontology courses, which were fascinating to me, and enjoyed really learning more about older adults. Another couple years into that, and after starting to do some actual retirement coaching and learning about some of the fears and the fears and the joys and the all that goes on with that, making that retirement transition, especially for people who have been in the 8 to 5 work world for 40 years. It's a tough thing. But I was out having a glass of wine with a friend of mine about 2 years into that phase of my life. And I said to my friend Sandy, "Where have you been? I haven't seen very much of you this year." And she said, "Well, I've been on an airplane going back and forth to see my mother on the East Coast. And she's just really in a tough spot right now, and I'm trying to help her. My dad died a couple years ago, and my brother and I knew we needed to get her moved out of this big home that she had been in and into someplace a little safer for her." So we all three went out and we found a continuing care retirement community that she really fell in love with, and we helped her move in there. But of course, that wasn't the end of it. We had to then sort through all of the stuff that she couldn't take with her, give it away, sell it, dispose of it somehow, and finally sell the home. So it was a long process. And she said, "It's been a year and I'm still not done. I'm still not actually out of that house." So I looked at her through all of this soliloquy that she was doing, and I said, "Sandy, you and I don't have kids. Who's going to do that for us?" And we kind of looked at each other and went, "Well, I don't know." So that question sent me on set me on the trajectory that was really to be the crux of my life for the next 10 years. Because with that, I don't know, I started really looking into what had happened to people that did not have family to support them, especially adult kids. And over time, that had it had been less of a problem, because what's happening, of course, now is that we have what I call this sort of family diaspora, where people from, especially the more educated families, are moving here and there, far away, sometimes across country, sometimes across the world, to embrace the kind of life they want, the kind of work they want to do. So we have not only people that don't have children as being in that position, but we have people that may have children that live in various assorted places. When I first conceived of solo aging, and I actually am the one that coined that term somewhere around 2010 or 2011, nobody used it for a long time, but I was pretty happy with it. It wasn't a downer like the only other one I was hearing, which was elder orphan, and I couldn't live with that. So solo aging came about. But as I started talking about it, and as I started getting guidance and advice from other people about their particular take on solo aging, I started discovering, for one thing, that people without children were just simply not going to be the only category within solo ager. It was originally because that was my connection to it, but I have had thousands of people come up to me afterwards and offer up all kinds of other groups of people that might be part of this whole solo aging thing. So I now conceive of solo aging as a variety of circumstances that a person may find themselves in. And I think that these bubbles pretty much illustrate the majority of, if not all, the circumstances that people might find themselves in and consider themselves a solo ager. And of course, there are sort of varying degrees. I consider myself a solo ager, even though I am married. My husband and I do not have kids. We have other close relatives around, nieces and nephews and whatnot. So that's out of the picture for us. So we're going to have to rely on what we can kind of cobble together as a partially a related, partially a friend family. A good example of the gray bubble you see over there toward the right is I have a neighbor lives around the corner from me. Her name is Judy. She's married to a fellow named John, and they have a 36-year-old son. But a few years ago, he had the nerve to fall in love with and marry a Danish girl. Well, where do you think they're raising their kids? Right, Copenhagen. A little far to go when somebody has a crisis. So although there's much love and devotion among them, they can't, he nor his wife nor their 3 kids that they're now raising in Copenhagen, they can't just rush over to Santa Rosa, California to help their parents who may have found themselves in a crisis, a medical crisis, a mobility crisis. So you can see on these other bubbles, the other various kinds of solo agers that I envision. And by the way, I don't know if Nadia mentioned this, but I'm perfectly fine with you putting all kinds of questions in the Q&A or the chat, and we'll get to those later. Probably with an online setting like this, I can't take them as they come up because I can't see all your hands, but I have left plenty of time. So one of the first things I did when I sort of discovered solo aging, the way Columbus discovered America, that there were a lot of people involved. I kind of wanted to know, were Sandy and I 2 of 50, 2 of 500? How many of them were out there? So initially, the Pew Research had done they had gathered some data in about 2010 with census that was prior to that. And I realized that, interestingly, baby boomers were childless at a rate that was double all previous generations. Pretty amazing. All previous generations back as far as record keeping. But when you think about it, there are some really good reasons for that. It's not a mystery how that just kind of happened. Because think about what was going on in the 60s and the 70s with regard to policies, with regard to politics, with regard to what people were starting to kind of agitate about. And two of the most important things that happened during that era were the women's liberation movement, which, because of the pressure that was brought to bear on Congress, on universities, on different career fields, all of a sudden, doors that had been shut pretty tight for women began to open all over the place. So women not only had the chance to get whatever education they wanted and could afford, and of course, education was much more affordable in many ways back then, but they were also opening doors to career fields that women had barely been able to scratch the surface of before. So that's a big difference. And of course, the other really big difference was that in 1964, the pill was released for general consumption, and the baby boomers were the first generation to truly take advantage of that. So between the pill, between all of the women's lib movements, and the sheer numbers of women that could choose between being a wife and a mom and having an exciting career, well, many of them, myself included, chose the latter. Now, I did marry, but it was not my destiny to have kids. That was a choice. For some women, it's it's not a choice, and of course, realize a lot of the sorry, in vitro fertilization and the kinds of things that help women who don't look like they're going to have that choice to actually do have the choice are much, much more common use today, much, much more prevalent than they were 30, 40 years ago. So this is the breakdown, and you can see the kind of the development of people aging without children. The bar on the far right, the light colored one, represents the generation before baby boomers. And then, as you can see, with the first wave of the boomers, those born between about 54 and 46, you've got close to double the number who don't have children. And then when you get into the late boomers, those born between about 55 and 64, now you have even more people choosing to remain childless. So this has had a big, big impact on how we can look at kind of a safety net under people that when they get older. So looking at who lives alone, today, there are some pretty interesting and maybe surprising statistics about people who live alone. For whatever reason, it's predominantly, but of course not all, it's predominantly women who live alone. And throughout much of our midlife, living alone and having a career, having something meaningful to do and being relatively healthy, that was a great thing. I have never met a middle-aged woman with an interesting career that would say to me, oh, I wish I hadn't chosen this path. I wish I was just married and living a life of leisure. I never run into that. Most women that I run into love being vibrant, love their careers, even if they're not hard-charging careers. They give meaning and purpose to their lives. But what happens as people start to get older and begin, for whatever reason, to leave those careers, to leave them behind, that's when we start to see a shift. And we see a shift in how many people live alone, because of course, for whatever reason, men still do die earlier than women. Sometimes, sometimes not, but also sometimes by just a couple years, sometimes by 10, 20 years. So the average life expectancy of men is not into the 80s yet, and for women, it's now into the 80s. I think before COVID, it had reached about 82, and men it had reached about 78. So what we know about being older is that social support is absolutely key, and that relationships by far and away trump money. Now, that may not have been the case when you were middle-aged, but as you get older, different values come to the fore for most people. And that, of course, assumes that you have enough money to live a comfortable life. So we're not talking about people who are struggling to just keep a roof over their heads. And mine and a lot of the other experts in the field of aging today believe that where you settle, aging in the right place, is the key to achieving the kind of satisfaction and happiness that you want later in life. And even though living alone was great when you were in your 40s and 50s and 60s, it can, for various reasons, and often does, lead to isolation, makes you vulnerable to all of the, the electronic scams, the digital scams that are out there, people that just want to see you as frail and vulnerable and come in and take advantage of you. It just happens. It's without being the risk of the ageism police coming to get me, it just happens. People do get more frail, less able to have the kind of mobility that they had in their younger years as they get older. I've watched it in so many people personally, and you probably have too. But solo agers are no different from everybody else, people who don't consider them solo agers. And I think that if these three words seem to so sum up for me what people want and need later in life: community, purpose, and wellness, right? We want to have friends. We want to have a comfortable place to live where we say we belong and there are people there that support us and we to support them. And something to look forward to when you get up in the morning, to wake up and say, oh, today I'm going for a hike, or today I'm going to read that book that I haven't gotten to, or today I'm going to get together with friends, whatever it is, and different strokes for different folks, for sure. Wonderful food. We all like to eat good food, and care when we're unwell. Somebody to come and hold our hand, bring us food, someone to be there to comfort us as we recover from whatever illness it is or not. But somebody to be there for us. These relationships they can come from all kinds of places. Most likely from immediate family, but sometimes extended family begins to play a role, and friends of all sorts. All of these pieces to make up what for you, for me, for any of us would be our kind of our friend circle. I'll say a little bit about more in just a minute. A little bit more about that in just a minute. But actually, I'll tell you an interesting story for me. I think that I just took all of this for granted. I don't know, just I always had people around me. There were people to talk to, people to work with, people to share ideas with, just people. And then COVID hit. And we all kind of went into hiding, sort of a hibernation, somewhere around the middle of March of 2020. But an interesting thing happened to me that really brought this to the front of my mind in quite a startling way. About 2 months into the whole thing, my husband and I were sitting and reading the morning paper, as we do. We still take a paper. And I came across a little article about a man who lived a couple communities down Highway 101 from Santa Rosa. He lived in Petaluma. And it was a story about how he went out on his back deck. He'd been doing this for about a week. He went out at about 8 o'clock in the evening, which was about dusk in May, and would howl. Ow, ow, just howl. And what do you think happened? Right, people howled back. So pretty soon this whole neighborhood in Petaluma was howling. And so I read the article and I looked at my husband and I said, read this article. We could do this. And so we did. We went out in our cul-de-sac. And now, interestingly, we had just moved into this house about 2 years before, and we're still working. He's still busy. I'm busy. So we really hadn't had a chance to do more than kind of just wave at the neighbors. But we went out on our cul-de-sac and we howled. And sure enough, the neighbors started coming out. Well, they too, of course, had been isolated in their homes, having grocery delivery and washing all the fruit, and you know how that routine went. But they hadn't gotten a chance to see anybody but the people who lived with them. And it was very cool. People came out, they started howling with us. And then the next night that turned into some of us bringing out recordings of old songs that had howling in them and playing them on various projection systems. And pretty soon we were having socially distanced happy hours, and then socially distanced bring your own everything dinners. And we could do that, you see, because we were neighbors. We were right there in the same cul-de-sac. We could set up our tables, and then if somebody had to use the bathroom, they just went to their own house. So we didn't have to touch anybody. We didn't have to breathe on anybody, but we could talk to them. It was somebody new to talk to. And it was just a lifesaver for us. We still do some of that with our neighbors. We even rigged up a movie night with somebody bringing their large screen TV, kind of rolling out to the door, and we'd again gather around, socially distanced. It was great fun, and it was a huge boon for me during the whole COVID thing. So again, I want to say that where you live is something that I believe makes a huge difference in how you will age whether you're solo or not. But especially for solo agers, there are so many options and more coming online all the time. There are more and more people who are pursuing ideas like the Golden Girls. You know, you have a group of friends, you go in and buy a house together, figure out ways to live together and to support one another as though you were a family. You are a family at that point. There are co-housing communities and other kinds of intentional communities. Some people choose to live with some part of their blood family, maybe through building an ADU on a property. So I have an additional dwelling unit. The only thing that I think is pretty unhealthy, is my opinion, in getting older, is to live all by yourself, to live isolated. To me, that's a scary thing. And I honestly have had people at conferences with some regularity come up to me and say, you know, I've done really well so far. You know, I live 10 miles out in the country and I don't have a soul around, and that's the way I like it. So what do you got for me? I look at them and say, you know, if you're happy that way and you don't want to think about anything that could happen in the future to you. I just want to say that you may have a crisis and you may lay there for 3 days before somebody finds you if you don't want to engage in any sort of a system to live near, somehow be close to other people. So, of course, that's always a risk when you live way out in the country. But this kind of becomes a bigger risk as you get older and your mobility declines some. I don't know too many people in their late 90s or hundreds that are still driving. Whether somebody else took their keys away or they finally said, you know, I'm a danger to humanity. I shouldn't be doing this. And yes, we have lots of new options like Uber and Lyft and different kinds of transportation modalities, but still, it's just you and maybe a friend, hopefully a friend, way out in the country. My husband and I used to live kind of further out. We liked rural living, but we realized at some point that it wasn't a good idea to do it anymore. So we've left that pipe dream behind, and we now live where we have lots of people around us. So another way of looking at your support system is to look at who is around you. Now, in general, when we're in midlife, we have a support system that by and large looks like this. Some of these bubbles may be smaller for you, some of them may be larger. You may not have the spouse or significant other bubble. But in general, we all have these bubbles. But what happens as, What happens as we get older is that some of these bubbles grow and some of them shrink. So we don't know which ones are going to grow, which ones are going to shrink. But eventually we may end up with a support system that looks like this. And I don't know about you, but I don't want my support system to look like that. I don't want to have my greatest communication and opportunity for socialization. I don't want it to be with just the doctors and other people I care to take care of me. I'd rather it look more like this. I'd rather have a community around me, friends, people that I hang out with day in and day out. And that's not going to happen to me if I age somewhere where I don't have people around. So as used to independent living as most of us become throughout our lives, some more conjugate communal living may be an important piece of getting old in a way that that makes us happy and gives us a lifeline and a kind of a social safety net. So again, I want my social system, my support system to look more like this. I certainly want other people in it, and I know I'm still going to have doctors and other support care in it, unless I'm one in a million. But friends and community that's where it's at. That's where it's at for me, and I suspect most of you as well. Now, here's another look at hierarchy and connections, which I think is important to kind of keep in balance as we get older. Now, this was originally kind of developed by Powell, the fellow that wrote Bowling Alone, but also in a couple of recent books about connections and building community. The guidance that some of the people who consider themselves experts on social systems would say, at any given time, we ought to have 3 to 5 close, intimate connections. Now, one of those might be your spouse, or not having a spouse, then 2 or 3 close friends that you really can count on. I remember the litmus test for me is, can I call this person at 3 in the morning if I'm in trouble? And if I waver on that, if I think, oh, I don't know, then that's not a person that I want in my inner circle. I want to be able to call somebody at 3 a.m. and I want to be able to pick up the phone and do it without even thinking. That's a close friend. That's somebody that knows you, they know your life, they know some of your history, they know what's important to you, they know some about maybe what you're going through medically, physically. That's a close friend. Now, on the outside of that, there are social companions, people that we hang out with, maybe we walk with, ride bikes with, hang out with in our book clubs and at the gym and wherever else you go, where you're with people, hiking clubs. And those are important too. And in general, most people have 5 to 20 of those kinds of friends. And then there's people that are in our overall tribe. People that I don't know, somehow kind of in general think the way we do. We have some things in common with our values are in common. A good example of this from my own life is when my husband and I moved up from Silicon Valley to Santa Rosa, which is the wine country, for those of you that aren't familiar with my side of the country. We knew we had to replace a lot of this picture. So one of the first things we did is we did some research and found a synagogue that we thought we would resonate with most of the congregants. We joined, started going to a lot of their activities, started going to Friday night services and meeting people. We joined a Havurah for a while, and it immediately gave us a tribe, several hundred people that we were in this tribe with, this congregation. And through that and through the contacts we made with some neighbors and people with some interests that aligned with ours that were in groups we were in, then we formed new social companions. Neighbors played a big role in that for us. And COVID played a big role in developing some of those relationships. And then eventually, over time, a few of those people, for me, became close friends, intimates. So these lines are kind of fluid, and people aren't, you don't immediately have a confidant when you meet somebody new. They usually flow through the tribe set, the social companion set, and then finally come into your inner sanctum, is a way of putting it. But again, these lines are kind of fluid. The numbers will vary for everybody, but that's for most people, that's kind of what their hierarchy of connections looks like. Now, I know that one of the things that you are very interested in this particular conference is legacy. And I want to give you my view of legacy, and specifically, of course, legacy for people who are unattached, who are aging alone. And I so believe that no matter whether you have kids or not, and whether you even want to or not, you will leave a legacy. There are kind of macro level legacies, if you leave your mark on the world somehow, and there are micro legacies that you may leave to just one individual. And you can see on the screen all these, the other kind of dichotomies. And by the way, we all probably leave some negative legacies. And I bet everybody can think of someone in their family, somebody in their past life who has left a negative legacy or a mixed legacy for you. And you have learned to live with that, learn to try and live a different legacy, try and live a life that provides a different legacy for the people that remain. But like it or not, we're leaving legacies. And I think the important thing is to be intentional about the legacies that we leave. I had a wonderful, wonderful friend who I had known since the 70s, when she and I met serendipitously because our, at the time, husbands were doing some work together, and we got thrown together and discovered that we really, really liked each other. And at the time, she was 12 years older than me, and she was doing the kind of work that I really wanted to get into. And I had just kind of started to enter into that world. And she helped me tremendously. She was really a mentor. Throughout the next 25 years, she was a mentor to me. And she taught me so many things, and I would go to her when I was in a quandary with my work. And then fast forward up to the late 90s, and she got sick. She had ovarian cancer. I saw her several times. She lived in the middle of the country, and I was out here on the West Coast. So I traveled to see her several times during her illness. And actually, a group of us, even in the earliest days, as soon as she recovered her hair loss, went to Mexico together, had a great time. But as ovarian cancer often does, it ran a 3-year course. And as she got toward the end, I decided I was going to go spend the end of life with her as well. And in a sense, to thank her for all that she had given me throughout the years. So I spent the last month of her life with her in Mayfield, Kentucky. An interesting experience in itself, and my first experience of helping someone in their life. So we all leave legacies of all kinds, and I think it's kind of helpful when you think about legacy to think of the legacies that people have left you and what you're doing with those legacies. So I see life and aging for sure as a journey. We all have a lot of questions as that journey unfolds for us. And it's conferences like this that kind of help us find answers to a lot of the questions on the journey. But one final note I want to leave you with is this meant to try to avoid magical thinking. And this is, I'm sure you can all read this. This is how I think of magical thinking. This just isn't how most of us are going to die. Statistics don't lean this way. Nothing leans this way. You might. I mean, people do actually die this way from time to time, but it's unlikely. It is likely that we will go through a period of dis-ease of some sort or another. It is likely that we will be challenged with mobility of some sort, of being able to see, of being able to hear. So the question becomes, how do you want to deal with that? And how do you want to prepare for your final days? And I'm so gratified to see that there are really hundreds of people out there challenging that and saying our final days can be peaceful. They can be happy ones. They can be meaningful ones. But it takes some foresight and it takes some choice. So I'm glad to see a lot of these death doulas coming into my circle of meaning. I think that they're going to be a very important role. They're going to play a very important role as we all, as baby boomers, I'm guessing most of us on this Zoom meeting are, as we move into that final stage of life. So I'm going to leave you with that before we call for questions. And I think what I probably ought to do is stop sharing my slides so you can ask questions to a face instead of a slide.